Now hand over to David Mendoza to start our Anglo-Jewish workshop. David.
Well, thank you, and welcome to everyone sort of brave enough to stay on such a hot day. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask to the community?
Could be a quick one.
Could be.
Go ahead, Roger. If you could unmute, please. Let me see if I can help you.
Doing it.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes.
I think really to get things going, but it's a shame if David's sitting there just waiting for someone to ask a question. Although it was mentioned and hinted at, I'm not quite sure what the real reason was for Jews who had been resident in this country for some years not to apply for naturalization. I'm talking from the experience of my family, all of whom came to this country at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So they were all here for the 1901 census. One applied and obtained citizenship in 1911, my grandfather in 1925. But on the whole, there weren't many applications. And as I'm speaking, I realize what the main point was. And the point seems to be that it was the men rather than the women that were making the applications. Was there a reason for that? Were women before the Second World War entitled to make applications in their own right for naturalization? Does anyone know the answer to that?
I can offer an anecdote, an observation from my own family. My great-grandmother and grandmother, who came from Warsaw. My grandmother acquired British citizenship when she married my grandfather, so obviously didn't need to do anything. My great-grandmother, described by my late father as 4 foot nothing of concentrated evil, never acquired British nationality, and indeed we have her aliens card, which showed she lived in about 15 different places during the Second World War. We don't know the reason. We speculate that either there was some kind of missing document, that's to say that her estranged late husband, my great grandfather, and she never married, and she was ashamed to bring this up. And also, my great grandfather had died of a social disease, let's say, some years earlier. And so we wonder whether this is the reason, but I don't know. I think Jill has very sensibly gone to have a cold drink. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
I mean, in my view, it was just the sheer cost that meant my family, who are trying to put food on the table, really wouldn't contemplate it. And the mere existence of all these lotteries does suggest that it's a bit of a luxury purchase, even though I think there are some clear benefits. So yeah. Jeanette, did you want to come in on that, or do you have a different question?
Slightly different take on it. So my family came to the UK. My uncle came as a kinder transport, and then he did his best to reunite, bringing his father to the UK after liberation from camps across Europe. And my dad was brought to the UK as a young sort of middle teenager. My dad naturalized not that long before marrying my mum, so before I came along. My grandfather's naturalization was declined by the UK because he was of no economic value to the country. He was infirm, unable to work, had to be paid for by Jewish social services, couldn't claim a UK pension. so couldn't work, was allowed to work for pocket money, nothing else, and spent most of his remaining years working on getting some kind of restitution from Germany for the family. So I can understand why the UK declined his naturalisation, to be honest. But I've got no records to prove anything other than records that I've got from within our family telling me. So different slant on it, really.
Hope that helped a bit, Roger. But
Thank you.
okay. All right, we'll go to Andrew next. Oh dear. Can't hear you, but you're not muted. Are you wearing a headset? I wonder if the microphone on the headset is folded up rather than down. No? Could just try unplugging it and seeing if you can talk into the computer, I suppose. No? Oh dear. Tell you what, why don't you have a play with that? If you can be bothered, you can type it into the chat. Failing that, hopefully you'll fix it while Barry's up. Barry, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, yes, I do. The great grandfather I mentioned that was naturalized in 1896. They were living in Dublin. They moved to Liverpool, and in the 1901 census, he was head of family, and it put down hotel, rather grandly, hotel proprietor. I often wondered how one goes from a draper to a hotel proprietor. I asked Stuart Rosenblatt, the famed specialist in Dublin. He just said enterprise. But anyhow, he probably, I went to Liverpool, looked for the place. Of course, it's demolished and it's now part of the university, but it was clearly a boarding house because it had a couple of foreigners staying there. My question though is, so he was the head of the household in the 1901 census. His wife, my biological great grandmother, was mentioned, and the children. In the Liverpool directory, I can't remember if it was a business directory or a regular directory for that address. It's not his name, but his wife's name. I wondered if anybody had any ideas. And the only time I've seen her named by her middle name as opposed to her first, in England, she went by Molly Clark, but I found from her Hebrew name that she was Malka Rachel, blah, blah, blah. So she was actually listed in the directory as Rachel Clark. Elsewhere, everywhere else, it was Molly Clark. Has anyone any idea why head of household Jacob, but in the directory, just his wife for those years in Liverpool? Each year they were, until they left in 1905 for South Africa. No. Okay.
Sorry,
I think we can speculate, but it's going to be hard to prove anything, isn't it? You know, perhaps there was another woman who just happened to be around at the time when they were putting together that directory. But how do you prove
With
anything?
the same name, you mean?
No. But maybe the head of the household had run away with another woman briefly just at the wrong time, and it was captured. I mean, normally, I mean, just the difference between the date of the directory and the date of the census means there are windows of opportunity for things to happen. But
Same
really?
years. 1901 to 1905 is when they were in Liverpool, or 1900 to 1905. And so she was listed, but he was listed as the head of household. Are you suggesting maybe he wasn't there at all, or just on that day of the census? I don't know.
I guess someone has to put the advert. Normally you pay for such listings, so just because they're not there at all doesn't mean the business doesn't exist. It means the business hasn't paid. Certainly that's true of London directories, but Yeah, I was just speculating something might have happened in their lives that meant they weren't living together exactly at that point. But yeah,
Things did happen, but not quite there. But possibly. And following on from that, has anybody found or know if there's any source back in the early 1900s of seeing tax receipts or any business, any information on money they made? That's my question. No.
Can I say something about that? I would say only if there was some sort of court case, then you might find something in the National Archives. I found 2 large boxfuls of documents regarding my 3 times great-grandfather's business, which included all his accounts and notebooks and comings and goings and correspondence, all of which I photographed. But it's
how did you know? Did you know that something had happened to be able to ask for that information?
So I just searched his name on the National Archives and I found the documents and I went there and photographed them. There'd been a court case regarding his will. It had been contested.
So
and they'd obviously gathered all his papers together and kept them.
You can go on the website, enter a name, and everything about that name comes up that they have.
Well, not all these documents. It just describes the court case, which is actually described in lots of law magazines as well. It obviously was quite prevalent at the time, but you'll just find a reference to it with the reference number if there is something.
So everything that the National Archives has on somebody, if you just enter their name, you
try surname, comma, first name, as well as first name, comma, surname, and just in case.
They might have used.
It depends which records. I mean, this is probably a chancery case, is it? And they're indexed by plaintiff and defendant.
Yes.
With a 1-line summary of what the case is about, and then you have to go and see whether there are any documents attached to that.
Yes.
I just attended a talk about criminal records up to 1971, and there's an awful lot that you can find in the National Archives under their crim section, and I just haven't dared put all my relatives' names in yet, but they do have a lot of information that isn't digitized. So, yeah.
Going back to the situation of the a wife being in the directory, but the husband who is on the census isn't in the business directory. This makes me think of the old phrase, put the business in the wife's name. Because, you have to remember our immigrant ancestors devoted enormous time and energy to making sure they did not come to the notice of the authorities. That was bred in the bone during the time under the Russian Empire, and they carried that idea over to this country. And so I think it's highly likely that the wife was a respectable lady of a respectable family and well known, and therefore went to the directory. And the husband, although he may have been a perfectly decent chap, had 0 track record, wasn't particularly known. There may have been a bit of ducking and diving over his actual immigration into this country, and therefore he may well have wanted to stay under the radar, even though radar
but
had
he did
been
get naturalized, though. He did get naturalized prior to that.
Well, if you got naturalized, now it is interesting. If you got naturalized prior to that, then there's obviously something going on that has not yet been revealed. That's all I can say.
It's something definitely to think about.
Tell proprietors being women, because I can recall looking through lots of early editions of the Jewish Chronicle, and when you look at advertising in the classified press, in the JC, and in other newspapers, predominantly hotel proprietors were women. And I think that was seen as a way of promoting a business by having it in the name. It's a bit like, Blackpool seafront landladies were predominantly women. it was a thing, and I don't think you can read anything further into it than that.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do you want Basil faulty when you go to a hotel or not? And maybe it's a more comfortable experience to deal with Sybil.
I don't know if we've talked a lot of 1901 census. I can't recall offhand. Was it completed by a? It was completed by a census taker. I think 1911.
Enumerator,
They
yeah.
had to put their own info. So it could have even been a lie that he was there at all, because I know he ended up in the old people's home in Jerusalem in 1905.
Okay.
I found that. So I wonder if he wasn't with them at all.
1901
He had
was
left from, who knows? A lot to think about. Thank you.
Andrew, did you want to
1901
comment?
So I was saying 1901, there was a household form, which was then copied by the numerator into the books. So all the household forms were destroyed, but the books, the enumerator's books, are retained.
So that there could be lies on that form. He could
Yes.
have been listed on there, but not actually been there. I
Yeah.
guess.
Possibly.
There's a lot of intrigue around him, anyhow, I have to say. So
Yeah.
that's all very interesting.
As a bit of
Glad
an
I stayed
aside,
on. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, as a bit of an aside, I was at the National Archives on Tuesday, I think it was, and I got to see the original census books for, not all of them, for 1841, 61, 91 and 1901. It is quite nice to actually see the originals, but as you say, they're what the enumerators put in there, not the original household returns. And I don't think I saw a 1911, but I don't quite know how that one is different, or 21 is
I
too.
believe, as I recall, 1911. Maybe I'm wrong. No, I won't say. I think that was
no,
filled
1911. They're separate entries that we get to see on Ancestry compared to them all being stuck together. You know, you get to see that original thing, and you can see the original signature of the head of household as well. Yeah. Andrew, you have the floor and we can now hear you. Do you want to ask your question?
So I was going back to naturalization.
Okay.
During the break, I dug out I had to dig out references in some of the stuff that I get my students to read when we're looking at migration, and found that there's an interesting study that looks at all the naturalizations in South Shields from 1870s to 1940s. And that reckons that one of the major reasons for naturalization was to own property, because you couldn't own property unless you were naturalized.
Oh.
You could only rent it.
Do you know if you've got Louis Levy? I'm looking for a Louis Levy from South Shields.
No, it's a summary. There's 700 and something of these naturalizations in the study.
Okay.
A third, looks like about a third of them are Arab and Ottoman mariners who settled in South Shields. So there's a good chunk of people from Russia and Austria and places as well.
I mean, certainly in my family, the chance of buying a property was just, it would have been a dream, you know, for a generation or two after they came in. But I think it was at my parents' level was the first time they actually owned rather than rented. But at least they could have bought if they could have afforded, because then they were starting to get born in the country. Yeah.
Well, if they're running a business, then and need premises, then it may be more effective to buy rather than to rent. Yeah.
No, I think we were still journeyman cabinet makers back then, you know, so no real business ownership. But okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Any other questions for David and other experts?
Can I just say something? Slightly related to the talk. It's regarding passports rather than naturalization. I've been researching for some time one member of my family who was I found this by chance a couple of weeks ago. He was imprisoned in the Belém Tower in Lisbon. Sorry. And I found this etching in a car boot sale. So now I found a huge amount of information about his imprisonment in this tower. And I was surprised to read that it said this is 1828, by the way, and it's reported in Parliament every day and discussed, and it's all been recorded. One of them just says, Mr. Marcus Ascoli, a British subject established in Lisbon, having taken out his passports in due order, was proceeding to Gibraltar on private family business in Portugal. When at Belém, he was taken from the vessel and imprisoned in the tower. It goes on a lot more, but several of the items from Hansard, presumably, mention his passport and the papers he had filled in. So I was surprised at the time to find that there was such a thing as a passport in 1828. But having looked it up, I see that passports were first issued in 1540. And, you know, but the ones like we have now, looks like 1778. There was something similar to what we have now. But I was just amazed there was such a thing.
I don't think the 1540 passports had photographs on them.
No, I don't think so. There's the oldest one in existence, it says, was issued in 1641 and was signed by Charles I. It's just
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Have you, for that particular person, have you looked at the British diplomatic records from the Portuguese embassy of the period?
No, are you going to do that for me, David?
Oh, one day.
Are you
Also,
volunteering?
I mean, obviously, this isn't British research, but there is a surviving notarial archive in Lisbon, which survived the great earthquake and tsunami and whatever. Do you know if that person was just like transiting through Lisbon or was actually doing business there?
Well, it says he was doing business, and
Okay,
I know that his parents were living there. I had an address where they were living, and I've even looked at the street, but I didn't have a lot of time to do research. But I've got
living there as Jews.
I've got a large ring binder just on this one person of information, masses of information about him.
I would reckon it's worth looking at the archives, see what's there. Because if people died there, then probably if they died as British citizens, that should also be registered there.
What is interesting is that Portugal is Britain's oldest ally in Europe. And that goes back to John of Gaunt's daughter marrying into the Portuguese royal family and being the mother of Henry the Navigator.
That's the British perspective. The Portuguese don't quite share that view. They
don't. I know that.
But
it depends on whose version of history you're reading.
Indeed.
Doesn't it? And it's the case with all your research, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
I always thought our family history was, when correctly sourced, would be agreed. But I guess the same is true of family history and country's history. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this particular person was born. He was born in London, but he's died in Hamburg. One of that community, Jeanette. You know about.
Was he buried in the Sephardic cemetery?
I should think so.
Because, oh gosh, what's his name? He's about 120 now, but he wrote that huge book on the...
There's loads of information available about the Sephardi community in Hamburg.
Yeah,
Gina, we should talk off list. We'll talk.
Okay.
All right. Shall we move on, or are you searching for something, David?
I was trying to think of the name of the book, the guy's name. It's Levy something, but I'm afraid I've eaten my last ice cream. I'm overheating.
The big lexicon of the Sephardim.
Yeah, Ton's got it. Send a message to Ton.
I've got copies of the relevant pages.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just wondering where I should be looking for the route of the boat when my was, because when he went to America in 1908, his father was living in South Wales, so he must have got to, I think, one of the northeast ports from what is now Latvia, travelled across land to South Wales, and then gone on to America for whatever reasons, and then came back. And it was trying to find the boats that he came back from America on. That's what I'm trying to. What boat was he on when he came over from what is now Latvia? And what was the boat he was on when he came back from New York?
Sounds like something for Nick Evans, and I think he's done quite a lot on Lee Bow to Grimsby and those sorts of journeys. There are some records, but
I thought
University of Hull, isn't it?
yeah.
Nick Evans.
I thought there weren't records unless you're talking about a ticket all the way through to United States. Just
No, not complete ones, but that's not quite the same as the ones that were destroyed by the government. I believe some of those exist, and Nick Evans has written extensively on that. There's also talks available on the JGSGB website when Nick Evans spoke to us at a conference many years ago. But I would just look for the name Nick Evans and his student Joshua McMullen. Jeanette knows.
Right, former student, now Dr. McMullen, working somewhere else.
Yeah, but you know they've written a lot of academic papers on the subject. But,
also, if you get the chance, get to listen again to last week's Jewish Gen talk, because it does a lot of this area from the other direction and looking at things from a US perspective, and it might just be helpful. They've not sent out handouts or anything from it yet, but see if you can get to listen again.
Right, thank you.
What date was the return journey?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Joanne, what date was the return journey from the States to
I don't know,
England?
because he was in the 1911 census. He was on the boat going to New York in 1908. His father died in 1910 in Triallo. And then on the 1911 census, he's listed with his sister.
I think
so sometime between 1908 and 1911, he came back.
So where does he go in 1908? Which port?
Well, he was on the Teutonic. We think he was on the Teutonic going from Southampton to New York.
To New York. So I'd look at the New York departure.
So there were relatives in New York. We know, we think, you know.
Okay. So is he in the 1910 US census?
I don't know.
First question, because that will tell you whether if he's there in the 1910 US census, you've got a much narrower window. But the other thing is to look at the New York departures passenger lists, which are available. So there's nothing at this end.
Yeah.
But the New York authorities did keep the departure passenger lists. You can look at those. They're on ancestry.com and probably on Family Search as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure that there are incoming passenger lists from the United States to Britain, certainly for the United States to Liverpool. round about that period.
Whether he went to Cardiff, we don't know, you see. Whether he went into one of the big ports or were there boats coming from New York to Cardiff?
Well, that you'd have to reserve. I don't know offhand. New York to Liverpool certainly well documented. But I mean, as we know, the records of travel from continental Europe, including Russia, to the UK during the period of immigration are very, very patchy. There's really only the Hamburg passenger list plus possibly in Bremen and very little else. But when you're talking about coming into Britain from the rest of the world, particularly from the Americas, I'm pretty sure that documents exist, and certainly from the United States to Liverpool for a good long period. So you should get lucky on that one, Jan.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Next question, I think, is from Barry.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes.
Yeah. Does anybody have any ideas? Family law, so I guess I have to agree with it. Both separately, my father and his sister on different occasions wrote or told me that the family emigrated to the UK from Poland in 1881 or 1883. It was after the date of the 1881 census. The first document I have found was from 1890, and I have nothing between arrival and 1890. I don't know for sure whether they came originally to Liverpool and then Dublin, but I have 3 addresses in Dublin, which I had the amazing good fortune to personally visit last year, having written to the people there. That was very emotional. I have a little story, a quick little story to tell you about that. I'll tell you that now, and then you can let me know if you feel there's anywhere I can look for information between 1881 or 1883 and 1890. But when I was in Dublin, there's one, some of you will know that it was a very large Jewish population in the district, which was actually dubbed Little Jerusalem. Tons of butchers and all those little stores. Only one of them still exists, although it's owned by South Americans, and the only nod to Jewishness is that they make challah on Friday. Other than that, it's all South American, but it was called Bretzels. And my hair stood on end when I saw that, because I always remember, as I'm sure many of us did, going to Lion's Corner House with our grandparents on a Sunday and having a cup of tea, and we'd have a bun and something. And I always remember my grandfather, who would have been a child back at the time in Dublin, I always remember him saying to my grandmother more than once, I don't know why it stuck in my mind, this isn't as good as Bretzel. I always assumed at that time, being a small child, that Bretzel was someplace in Germany or whatever. So you can imagine how, when I see Bretzel, the baker in Little Jerusalem in Dublin, how that made me feel very emotional. But that's my story. My question is, has anybody any idea what I can do to find out what kind of documents to look for? I can't think of anything where they were until I found the first document in 1890 with an address.
ChatGPT just told me there's lots of Dublin synagogue records still available, so that might be a good place to look.
Synagogue records, okay. I do have the name of the rabbi. They were married in 1890. She was widowed and she remarried in 1890, and the address of the marriage, which both on the marriage authorization and the rabbi's name, is his home. So obviously people were married in the rabbi's home, but they must have belonged to some synagogue for sure. I have asked about that. I haven't found any information. There is a little famous. I've asked Stuart Rosenblatt, and he hasn't helped help me, because we don't even know if they were in Dublin before 1890. We know a lot about from 1890. But I haven't checked each synagogue, but their local synagogue is what is now the Jewish Irish Museum in Dublin. They were tried to be very helpful, but they couldn't find anything.
Barry, Jeanette has a suggestion in the chat. Do you want to say it, Jeanette?
Oh, please.
Oops.
I don't see
Sorry,
it.
I was looking for something else. Yeah, people didn't necessarily own property, they rented. So
Right.
in some places like local studies libraries, you might find information for a family name where in, you know, a rent book, because an estate or property owner would have collected rent. Some local studies libraries have extensive sets of rent books.
Local what libraries? I'm sorry.
Local studies libraries. So I know, for example, in the Central Library in Birmingham, they have extensive rent books for all the kind of properties where people rented. It's just an alternative, potentially underused source. Think
So you have to
local
know where.
histories.
Yeah.
You'd probably have to go there, so you'd need to think of where you need to go, and then, as you're in the US, find someone to go there and have a look.
I'm guessing Liverpool, because in Dublin there are directories, and I found them from 1890 in the directory and not prior to that. So
well, my suggestion for Liverpool is JGSGB member Saul Marks is a professional genealogist working out of Liverpool. Ask him.
I worked with him. I met him when I was there. We went around to Liverpool.
Okay.
We did, but we didn't look specifically for before the 1900, when we knew they moved there from Dublin. It's a question from 1880 to 1890. We know from 1890 to 1899 they lived in Dublin. So maybe they lived in Liverpool before.
It's a possible. I think one of the things that I would say, you know, if you're doing genealogy, one of the things that we all need to do as genealogists is what's called a reasonably exhaustive source, and that is to leave no stone unturned. So look at sources that you wouldn't otherwise think of looking in, because just occasionally you might find something. And also it helps to keep a record and document where you've looked and what you've looked at, because then as you move forward with your research, you can look at other things and you know what you've seen, so you don't need to retrace your steps.
I could ask Saul, thank you, about, because we didn't really look other than the address we knew they were at in 1900 after Dublin, but we didn't look earlier in the 1880s because they might have been in Liverpool, then moved to Dublin, and then moved back to Liverpool. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
In Dublin, there are some records called, from memory, this is going back from when I was researching it more than 25 years ago. I think they're called Townland records. And I think it's something like Townland records. And
Townland.
I think it's either Townland or Town or Township. And what they are is very similar to what Jeanette was talking about. It's records. It's like the it's like the Russian revision lists, where you have records of people who lived, and as Jeanette says, these are people who rent; they don't own. So, and I got a family member in Dublin from the Townland records, from the Dublin archives. And again, this interesting parallel, I don't know whether it will shed any light or not, interesting parallels with my own Millet family, because they too were living in St Kevin's Parade, just off Clanbrassil Street.
Exactly where mine was, in St Kevin's Parade.
There you are, St Kevin's. So there we are. Your family, your ancestors, and my Millet great grandfather and his brother would have known each other. They'd have davened at the same stibble, almost certainly, because the stibble, my great great-grandparents lived, I think, at 12 St. Catherine's Parade, in the Stibble, where the Rove
7,
was.
9 or
Was
9.
you were at 9 there? Well, they definitely would have known each other. Dublin at the
This
same.
was in 1890 to 1892, I think. Then
Yeah.
they moved to 3 addresses, all very close.
Exactly when my great grandfather, Millet, lived in St. Kevin's Parade in 1890, only for a short period, and something that may possibly be a clue or might be a red herring is that my great grandparents originally came to Britain in 1887, and they settled in London. And then they had one daughter in London in 1888, and then the next child was born in Dublin in 1890. And initially one might wonder, why would they move from London, which is the commercial and economic and political heart of the country, to Dublin? And of course, we all know what happened in 1888. It was the Ripper murders. And my great-grandparents actually lived in Cannon Street, which was a very short walk from where the Ripper murders were. And I can imagine that having a Yiddish account, they thought, crikey, we don't want to live where this lot's going on. Let's stay in Britain because there's money here, but let's get as far away as possible. And Dublin was where they went. So it is, the reason I mention that is because it is possible that your ancestors too may have originally settled, rather than in Liverpool, they may have settled in southern England, perhaps Dublin, perhaps Southampton. And just to finish up, after they only stayed in Dublin for a couple of years, because by 1891, my great-grandparents had moved to Bristol. So not exactly an answer to your question, but a kind of a parallel movement that may or may not be of some help.
What was the last name?
Millet, Millet, as in these are the founders of the famous Millet's menswear chains of shops.
Oh, right. Yeah,
seven brothers and 4 sisters. That's how it all started.
Roger, did you have a comment on this?
I didn't have a comment, but I have a question for David, if I may ask the question.
Just before you do, was there anyone who wanted to comment on this recent discussion? I saw a few hands like Louise and Susie. But...
Only that my great-grandmother died in 1933 at 24 St. Kevin Road, Dublin.
Okay.
Yeah. There were it was a totally Jewish area. It's now called Portobello. And actually I found an 1890 something article from a magazine, which I forget the name of, but I have it written down, which actually said, walking through Little Jerusalem, you could have been with the kids talking in Yiddish and everything, you could have been in any town in Russia, in Poland, or Jewish town, I should say. So, I mean, it was extraordinary. And now it's a good middle-class area. Very nice. The houses were new back then, and they've gone through some changes. And as I went to the 3 houses, one of them said that as much as possible they've kept it like it was, except they brought toilets inside and things like that. But it was interesting.
Okay. So who wanted to comment on this? I see Susie and Andrew. Susie, is yours a different question, or?
No, it was part of the same one. Partly I was going to what Jeanette said, only 10% of people owned houses in the turn of the century. But Barry, did your family arrive in Liverpool? Because I had people who came across and landed in Hull initially. And then did yours go to Liverpool and then?
Well, all I know is what my father told me, which of course was wrong. He said they left the Lomja region of Poland and arrived in Liverpool. Well, obviously they arrived in Hull or Grimsby, but because he said Liverpool is why I wonder whether perhaps they did live there originally. So I know but he also said that they ended up in Dublin, as did his sister say that. And of course, I found records from 1890 in Dublin. So there is these missing years between 1881 or 1883 where they may have lived in Liverpool, they may have lived anywhere, may have been in Dublin, although they're not in the directories. There's a thing called Tom's Directory for each year, and they're there every year from 1890 to 1898, 9. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Susie.
No, all I meant, I wondered whether they were in Hull at the time you were missing, but I've got the order wrong, I think.
In Hull. I'm not hearing very well, sorry. In where?
In Hull.
Oh, Hull.
Because they certainly arrived in Hull and then moved on fairly quickly from there. But
I think most of them went elsewhere. I don't think there were a lot that stayed in Hull long term.
That's what I meant. I remember I just thought it might be the years you'd lost them, but I think I got your years in the wrong order. But anyway, sorry about that.
I did write to Nick Evans once, and he never responded. But
Andrew, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just say the books that Rick was referring to are called the valuation books, and you have to go to Dublin to look at them.
They're digital. They're evaluation or valuation?
Valuation. And sometimes cancelled valuation books, because they fill up a book and then they transfer everything to a new book with a clean start, and then they're crossing outs and adding things in as people move in and out.
Sorry, were they in a particular town or everywhere? Or
they cover the whole of Ireland.
Oh, Ireland. Oh,
yes,
okay.
The whole of Ireland. So.
Oh, you're talking about Griffiths, I think.
Yeah. No. The valuation books run right up until the middle of the 20th century.
Okay.
But basically, every time a property changed occupant, that was recorded in the valuation book, because those were the people who were liable to pay the rates.
Okay, thank you.
Roger?
First of all, were you able to change my name, Lee, because suddenly my name is up there?
Yeah, I put it there.
Well done. Thank you very much. I've got a new computer because of this Windows problem. I've had to upgrade. Anyhow, the question is, was there an obligation on Jewish immigrants in the 1890s to register with the police? I asked the question because in his naturalization application, admittedly made 25 years later, my grandfather said he came to this country alone, which was not unusual, being the eldest in the family, and stayed with friends in Stratford. And I've got no other information, and no one else in the family's got information, but it occurs to me, if they were required to register with the police, which I think was the case in later years, that might be something to look at. Does anyone know the answer to that?
Did you have a naturalization paper?
Yeah.
Because for the naturalization, the ones that I have for 1896, both of them required the police report. So
yeah, but I just wonder, registration was something slightly different. I wonder if they had to go to the police station and say, I'm so-and-so, I'm living so-and-so, etc.
I'm just trying to remember what Jill said, and wasn't that something that came in with the 1905 Act? But that would be my guess. So I think 1890.
Wasn't it the 1914 Aliens Registration Act?
Possibly.
People that came in tended to live with people that they'd known from the old country or people from their community. The Yiddish word is Landsleute, people from that they knew from back home.
Yeah, I understand that, but were they obliged to register with the police?
Not immediately, only later as that was brought in, as we've just heard.
Okay. Jeanette, thank you.
Certainly the green books that I've seen are nowhere near that period, even though my people were here earlier. They were, definitely in the 20th century.
Out of interest, a senior law person in Northern Ireland has recently died, and he was Jewish, and so was sitting between the two sides of the disputes going on there. And after people who
from
he'd
England, sorry,
sentenced people after they'd been released from prison, he'd have them round to his house having meals, and he'd be discussing both sides of the arguments with them. And people would say, well, how do you feel? And he said, I don't feel for the people who I sentenced. I feel for the people, the families of the people left behind, of the families of the people who were murdered by the different factions, which I found very interesting. You know, he was under threat. He had to have mirror glass put into his house so that they couldn't see in to which room he was in, and all sorts of things. It was very interesting obituary.
Okay. Thanks for that, Joanna. Right, I'm looking around for hands. Jane, if you could unmute. No, I'll try and help. Oops, try and help you. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I found this meeting, all of it, very, very inspiring. You've got me back into action. Various things. The gentleman who didn't wish to be called up doesn't have to have been somebody who just didn't want to fight because of cowardice. He might have been a pacifist. And I'm always, I never judge when we don't know the people, you know. It's very easy to sort of think the worst when sometimes it's not the worst. So I just put that forward. I'm related to the people who own the Lions Corner houses by marriage. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that when the family came over in 1841, I think, or 43, they had nothing at all. And by 1914, they had 2 huge factories on Durwood Street, and they were employing over 4,000 people. I was wondering, I know about Piggott's. I've never actually researched the business, and I wondered, is there a particular book or something which I could look at to see when buildings were bought or turned into businesses or whatever? You'll have to excuse my ignorance. That's it.
The land registry, wouldn't it?
We were talking about businesses in before being listed, and I wondered which ones I should be looking at. So you think I should be looking at land registry? Okay.
That's what I've done in Gibraltar for very old properties.
It costs money to look at the land registry here.
Oh.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that if I'm desperate then.
What about Companies House? I'm not sure how far back their records go. It may be far, far too recent, but I think you could do a lot of Companies House searches free.
Oh, good, thank you. It's just interesting how a very small family, and it stayed within the family till it went bumpty bump, would start with absolutely nothing and end up being this massive business, huge. And it fascinates me how that happened. And I just would love to know when things began to turn for them. That was all.
Are you talking about Lions now, or
no? I know about them. No, that's all. You know,
I think Lazarus. Well, Lazarus. Do you know the Lazaruses? I think they were part of
part of them. Yeah.
You know John Lazarus?
I don't know him personally.
Okay.
I have all these people.
He's alive.
I don't contact people because I feel as if I'm. I always feel as if I'm intruding, so I don't. I'm very shy by nature. And I just like researching. I don't like putting myself.
I'll ask him if he knows anything. Oh no, but that's not what you're looking for, Lions.
No, no.
Okay.
But he might know of the family.
I think all it takes is a good idea at the right time when there's a market for it in general. So
it's that huge leap.
Yeah, but tiny. You look at Bill Gates of Microsoft, or any of these AI billionaires now, or Amazon, Jeff Bezos, you know, I mean, you just got to be in the right place at the right time.
Anyway, I will begin to look at the
In my own experience, the right place at the right time, but also, and I think this is the thing that separates the great achievers from the rest of us, having the courage and the confidence in your convictions to say not only is the right place at the right time, but I'm the guy who's going to be able to do it. And this is what people like Bill Gates and, of course, Michael Marks and all these other people. In the case of my family, again, the Millets, very similar. They were just, my great-grandfather and all his brothers and brothers-in-law, they were just peddlers, hawkers, and came over here with nothing. And then, after the Boer War, after the end of the Boer War, 1902, this was the first time when there was an enormous amount of army surplus stuff that was available for almost nothing. That could be picked up, and somebody who had an eye for a profit could buy it for almost nothing and then sell it. And this is what my great-grandfather and his brothers did. And then it was turbocharged at the end of the First World War, where the same thing happened again, only this time there was far, far, far more army surplus stuff available. And by this time they knew how to do it, they seized on it. And that is how what eventually became Millets 1928 Limited, and then all the other Millets firms, several hundred shops and so forth, started. So I would imagine your family, it's you have one or possibly two individuals in the family who have got the guts to take a chance, and because it's the right time, it pays off. I mean, there's thousands of us who've had the guts to take a chance, and it was the wrong time, and it didn't pay off. But that's how it is. There's a lot of luck, but also a lot of grit as well.
Well, funnily enough, it was the family that was making the uniforms in the First World War that you're talking about, that your family were buying at the end. And it was the First World War that was the first serious knock for the family, because there were so many, they made tailors' suits for men and hats. And of course, there were so many people killed during the First World War that the business wasn't there after. And it was all very difficult getting back. So that's what happened.
Yeah, and also after the First World War, this was the time when Montague Burton particularly came, and he was doing, he was making, he was mass producing suits and formal wear at a far lower cost than people like your family and my other great-grandfather and all the other master tailors could do, and so they were priced out of business. This was when the mass production started, and as you say, the great loss of the generation, those tens of thousands of young men killed in action during the First World War. There was a great an enormous change in the economic structure of society, and a very few people were able to take advantage of it, and a very large number of people were hit by it. So
Michael Portillo says about the Jewish influx into Leeds and the tailors in one of his books about the rail system in this country. I can't remember which book it is, but it's one of the chapters is about that part of England and the Jewish influx.
It's interesting. So there you go. I just want to say thank you. I've enjoyed the afternoon very much.
Yeah, so have I. Thank you.
Good. Right. I think at that point we should probably call it being almost 5 o'clock. Any final words from you, David?
I think we should all retire to cold baths.
It's been a very interesting afternoon. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Look forward to seeing you on another JGSGB Zoom probably next week. All right.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
I hope it cools down soon.
Come north. It's cool.
Is it hotter there than in Florida, where I live? It's a bit dull outside today. Maybe you should come over here to Florida.
Sounds like an idea. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye for
Okay.
now.
Take care. Bye.
Very much. Bye. Bye.